Hello and welcome to On the Cube Leadership Podcast. I'm Craig O'Sullivan, and we are also joined once again by the business pastor, Dr. Rod St. Hill. Dr. Rod, welcome again, and you're wearing quite an interesting shirt today.
Well, it's good to be with you again, Craig. And yes, our first real day of summer here. I know it's still spring, but it's over 30 degrees Celsius outside. And so I thought, why not break out the summer gear?
Be a little bit tropical. Well, you're bringing a little bit of fun and lightness to our day today. Our topic, as you know, we don't always have a theme throughout the messages, but it's kind of happened that way. And I keep saying that, but I think I might end up stopping saying that because we're going to probably have a theme. We've got another theme. Let's say it's a loose theme today, but our theme today is, well, what do you expect? You know, there's been a lot of things that's happened in the media, in latest news, in pop culture, in politics, in the business world, in ministry, that we can actually take for lessons to become better leaders. And so we're going to look at those through the lens of leadership, as well as look at the Bible and some leadership lessons from Luke that we're going to end off with. But they all have this recurring theme this week of, well, what did you expect? And we're gonna get kicked off with pop culture, which is always one of the most fun topics to talk about, and is probably one of the biggest. Well, what did you expect? What did you expect when a creative goes on a rant? That's right. We're going to talk about our good old friend Kanye West. Now, love him, hate him, what side of the fence you're on. I know that obviously he's grown in popularity in the Christian circles because of his latest album release, or his previous album release now. But Kanye is a hard man to pick. He's a hard man to really go, do I like him? Don't I like him? And it's quite interesting that he did this latest interview with Tucker Carlson. He's also been in the news for some rants that he's done on social media, on Twitter. And also he did an interview with Lex Friedman where he had some, let's say, some questionable comments. Now, Kanye, one of the big things that he's being challenged for lately is the fact that he went to a fashion parade and he wore a White Lives Matter shirt, right? He made up this shirt in the same font and everything like that with the Black Lives Matter, and he's copped a lot of flack for being a black man, for wearing this thing saying White Lives Matter, saying that he's abandoning his race and being a blasphemous almost to the black community, and he's getting all this flack from this act. And I want to address it. There's a couple of things within this interview that I kind of feel like we should address, but just addressing this first and foremost, I think that it's quite interesting that while we don't want to get too political, it's interesting that all what he's doing is he's highlighting almost the hypocrisy in the fact that when people had Black Lives Matters t-shirt, the other side of the fence were going, oh yeah, but white lives matter too, and all lives matter, and that's it. But now he's saying the white lives matter, it's this whole controversy on the other side of like, well, you're discrediting the Black Lives Matter and everything like that. So, Dr. Rod, what's your take on taking this controversial stand against something that is, I suppose, kind of a very obvious statement, right? The fact that, yes, all lives matter, and especially as Christians, we believe that God created us all equally, and we are all God's creation, and we are all sons and daughters of God, and we should all respect and honor each other equally. What's your take on him making this quite controversial stand?
Well, all I can say is if that's what God told him to do, good on him.
Yes.
And I've had this response on a couple of occasions in instances like this. There have been a couple of well-known cases in Australia as well. I think the bottom line is, are you hearing from God and obeying? And of course, we can't always know for sure whether that's the case. But on the other hand, I think what we need to do also is to recognize that he is an artist. He's a performing artist. And so this is how he communicates.
Yeah.
And often performing artists use the technique of hyperbole or exaggeration, if you like.
That's good.
And so I think it's fair enough for us to take this as an exaggerated statement made, because he fundamentally does believe that there is, a Christian principle. And it's the most fundamental Christian principle, actually, that says every human being is valuable. Every human being matters, because every human being was created by and is loved by God.
Yeah.
Now, different people will have different ways of expressing that. I think we should be fairly careful about making judgments on other Christians in terms of how they interact. He has obviously a very large public profile. And so, people like Tucker Carlson are going to interview him. They're not going to interview me.
Yeah. Not yet.
And so,
not yet. One day.
But on the other hand, he needs to be wise in the way in which he approaches it. And I think one of the things you're alluding to is that, well, you might hear from God, you might obey as well, but you also need wisdom.
Yeah, that's good. And obviously on our theme today is like, well, what did you expect? What do you expect when a creative goes on a rant? And that kind of leads me into more on his actual interview. There was some controversial things within that. But if you watch the interview, and there's bits out there and there's bits that they've cut out and everything like that, but if you watch it, it almost seems like the rantings of a crazy man, and that's something that they've challenged him with, and everyone's having a go because he's obviously admitted to some mental challenges, to bipolar and all those sorts of things, and everyone's like, oh, but it's this rantings of a crazy man. No, but if you actually look at it, he is a creative, he's an artist. He's not only is he a musician and a recording artist, not only is he a producer, he's also a fashion designer, and all of these things actually show that he's not just a musician, and he's not just a fashion designer. He is a true artistic. Because some people are really good at a musician, some people are really good at painting, some are really good at fashion, but he's just this artist. And I don't know if you've ever known an artist, but they think very differently. Their perspective of things is, and you kind of see in this interview, you can, rather than seeing rantings of a crazy man, you go, well, what do you expect? He's an artist. He's an artistic person that's kind of trying to put words to these thoughts, and because he's probably got a million thoughts running through his mind every minute. And you can see him kind of bouncing all over the place and giving 3-part answers to things, and it's all over the place. But I think we need to look at it and go, okay, he's an artist, and he's just trying to express what he's experiencing, especially as a new Christian, let's call him, as people say, a baby Christian. He's only recently come back to faith and kind of discovering what that all means. And he's actually spending a lot of time researching and studying the Bible, which is good on him. But he's thinking out loud, right? And I think that's he has this interview with Lex Friedman where he starts to go on this rant about, that black people are also Jews, and trying to compare to the Holocaust to Planned Parenthood, and like just all this, and you're just looking at it going, okay, this is just an artist that's just processing thoughts out loud. And it made me think about, and this was actually going to be a separate topic that I wanted to talk to you about, Dr. Rod, but it kind of flowed into this topic so well that there was an interview with Joe Rogan and Ben Shapiro just recently where they were talking about the halo effect. And they were talking about how, unfortunately, our society puts so much importance and value on celebrities that just because they're good at something, we now look to them as being the answer for everything. You know, we look to Matt Damon to be the answer for climate change, or just because he happens to be good at acting, or we look at some celebrities like Taylor Swift or whatever on her rants about the economy and whatever she wants to talk about, that we kind of take that because they're a famous person, because they're a celebrity, it's this halo effect of like, well, they must know everything. Dr. Rod, what's your take on us as leaders? I suppose twofold. Number one, looking to people with the halo effect, but also us falling, I suppose, victim to having the halo effect ourselves.
Oh, yes. And I just echo your comment in relation to Kanye West. Thinking aloud, I would suggest he's probably one who processes everything orally.
Yes.
And that would be reflected in his artistry as well. So I don't find anything he said very informative, nor do I find it offensive because of who he is.
Yeah.
With respect to the halo effect, it does seem to be pretty important. And I've done a little bit of reading on it just in the last few days. And I think it's exaggerated as well, of course, by social media.
Yep.
But also, I would have to say, I think, and this is a generalization, so it doesn't apply universally, but as a generalization, our education system no longer really teaches people how to think for themselves.
Yeah, that's good.
And so this notion that a great, say, musical artist or actor, I look up to them, I hang on every word, that's not being counted really by the education system, which broadly speaking is now teaching people what to think, not how to think.
Yeah.
And the same in the media. We're not getting very much proper analysis of news and current affairs anymore. I think that there are some independent, mainly conservative media organisations that I think do a fairly good job, and they are quite open about, what political persuasion they're coming from and so on, what their worldview is.
Yeah.
So they're at least being honest with us. But I don't think we can trust the mainstream media at all, because they're also telling us what to think.
Yeah.
They're not really presenting us with information, with two sides of the story, etc., and enabling us to draw our own conclusions. So I really think that this is a worldview issue. Yeah. That we're not really learning how to learn best anymore, because that's dangerous to those people who really want to peddle their own perspective.
Yeah.
But honestly, I don't find what Kanye West said surprising, offensive, or edifying.
Yeah, that's good. And I suppose that kind of goes back to, like, well, what do you expect? He's an artist.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're trying to get to with this. Is like don't place too much importance on people. I also want to just take a moment to talk about the halo effect and the impact I believe it has on poor leadership. And as you've probably heard me mention, we're on a mission to eradicate poor leadership by raising up the next generation of influential leaders to learn, live, and lead on purpose. And we do that with link in the description, our free leadership development program that's completely faith-based. And our mission is to eradicate poor leadership. And I believe that sometimes poor leadership is a result of us putting the halo effect on people that happen to be good at certain things, like celebrities. We look to a celebrity and go, you're amazing as an actor, or you're amazing on the sports sports court or field, or you're great with a ball or whatever. So now I look to you for my answers. And when that person doesn't have it all together in the rest of their life, we then fall apart. I've seen too often, pastors. We do this to our pastors. We give our pastors a halo effect, right? We expect that we kind of put them up on a pedestal. While we should, yes, honor and respect our pastors, remember they're human. They're fallible as well. They're not any better than us just because they happen to be on stage preaching on a Sunday. They are not the only person that hears from God. We can't rely on them to be the only person that hears from God. We need to live our own lives. We need to connect with God. We need to hear ourselves from God. And so I feel like there's too much poor leadership, partly on our fault, because we put so much emphasis on a pastor who happens to be an amazing pastor, and we expect them to be a great leader. They're different callings. Or they may be a great teacher, and we expect them to also be a great leader. They're different callings. And so we need to understand that there is a difference between them being good at something and them being good at everything. We can't expect the other people to have, to wear a halo. And also, conversely, we also can't expect to wear the halo as well. We can't expect that we're all the best. Like if you're a pastor, you can't, just because you're the pastor, you're not expected, and I'm kind of like, this is kind of like a PSA, you're not expected to be a great leader. Right? Yes, your team expects you to, but maybe that's not what God has gifted you to exactly. And so don't put that pressure on yourself to pretend that you need to be a good leader, or that you are a good leader. Maybe reach out and get some help to become a better leader, because we want to help you to partner with that gift that God's given you to preach, to evangelize, to teach, to be an apostle, to whatever it is that to prophesy, to whatever God's called you to. We want to partner with you. And sorry, I did go on a little bit of a rant there, Dr. Rod, but what's your take on that?
Look, I don't know that I can add very much. You know me, I'm the one who usually goes on the rant, but I can only say ditto. And really, we just need, as leaders ourselves, to be very aware that sometimes people will put us on a pedestal. And it's very flattering when people want to know what we think or what we would do in a whole range of situations. But I think wisdom says be fairly careful to act within the assignment that God has given you.
That's good.
Yeah, and just make your judgments on that basis. But Craig, there's a great deal of wisdom in what you've said, and I really don't think I can add to it.
Great. Well, you did. So thank you. And so let's shift gears. Let's go from, a very political Kanye West to politics, and look at some political leaders and some things that have happened in the local news, or in the recent news, is the UK Prime Minister Liz Truss has resigned. So I don't know whether you're up on the news, but the PM of the UK recently resigned after 40 odd days or something like that in office. And their excuse, or her excuse, was that, we just couldn't get our plan to work because we were left with the ship was already sinking, so to speak. That's kind of what she said. So she came in with all these tax cut plans. Like, obviously, around the world's hurting from the pandemic. And the results from the pandemic, and the financial impact from the pandemic. And a lot of countries are responding to inflation by increasing interest rates, because that's kind of what you do. And I'm sure Dr. Rod's economist brain is gonna start tweaking with this in a moment. But they took a different approach and thought, we're not going to raise interest rates. We're going to cut taxes, and that's going to curb inflation. But in a roundabout way, that's actually something that actually increases inflation anyway, because it increases spending and all that sort of stuff. So first of all, Dr. Rod, from an economist point of view, what is your take on her plan?
Well, I liked it. I actually thought that her plan was pretty good.
Yep.
I think the real issue was the timing of it.
Yeah.
The problem being, of course, that it was going to lead to a much larger government budget deficit, and that's really what spooked the financial markets. However, I would like to say this, and look, this is a contestable view, I do understand, but the political system, the media, and I'm sorry to say, the big business world and the financial markets, I think, are averse to true conservatives.
Okay.
I think it is very, very difficult for true conservatives to do well in the public limelight.
Yeah.
I think her heart was right. I think it was right to try to do something with the tax system. I think the big issue, however, was that the tax cuts really were not funded. And there is a whole branch of economics that essentially suggests if you reduce the taxes, the incentive for people to go out and earn income and be creative as entrepreneurs and so on, that will be so big that everybody's incomes will rise, and that will generate additional tax revenue, which will fix up the hole in the budget. But we've never really seen that work well in practice, at least in the short term. The most famous experiment along these lines was Ronald Reagan, who famously cut income tax. And essentially he said, well, the budget deficit will look after itself. It didn't.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't quite. And I think it's because there are very, very long lags in the system. But I thought her vision was a very bold vision. And I find it regrettable that it seems to me that basically everybody was against her.
Yeah.
And there was no way that her prime ministership should have gone. She was doomed within a few days, I think. But I do feel sorry for her. And you know, as our loose theme is, well, what do you expect? You could say, well, what do you expect in a world which, and this is my opinion, in a world which is rigged against true conservatives? What do you expect? We've seen it here in Australia way back in 2014 when we had a government budget which was released, which was designed to pull back on hugely excessive government spending. And politics went against the Prime Minister and the Treasurer of the day. The media went against them. And many of the initiatives that they proposed, which I felt as an economist and as a Christian economist, were called for and were reasonable and rational. They never got the support in the Parliament. They never got support in the media. Both the Prime Minister and the Treasurer ended up losing their jobs over it. Yet if they had been able to push through their policies, Australia would be in a far better position today than it actually is. So that's my take on it anyway, Craig. So I guess it's a different kind of perspective on the, well, what do you expect theme?
Yeah, no, it's good because I started researching it and I'm like, this sounds good. Like, to me, logical, I'm like, it sounds good. And then the more I researched it, it was just, this was a plan, this is different to everyone else. I'm like, that's great that you're doing something different. It's great that we should, as leaders, do things differently. And then all of a sudden, all of the reports just then went negative of like, oh, it couldn't have because it caused this and caused that. And I'm like, was it really? And it was actually, I'm glad that your response was that you liked it initially, because that was my response. I liked it, but it seemed that everyone was against it. And so I suppose the question then goes, what do you expect when the system is against you? So what do you expect when the system is against you? What should we do as leaders, as Christian leaders? You know, our mission is to actually do leadership in a different way, not the same way that people have always done it. I want you as leaders to do things differently, to discover your purpose, pursue your purpose, lead through your purpose, build up the people around you, not push people down, not take advantage of people, like do things differently the way the so-called system is rigged, right? Because it's rigged for success for poor leadership. How do we keep that up without having to quit, like unfortunately Liz Truss did, and this plan that you said had potential? What do we do? Was it that it wasn't well thought out? Was it that you weren't patient enough in the plan? Was it that it needed more support? Like what do you think we can draw from this as leaders in going against a system that is rigged against us?
Well, you've got to have grit for a start.
Yeah.
So if you're convinced that what you're doing is the right thing, then you will do everything you can to do it because it is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But we also know that leadership is about influence.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't influence enough people around you to support what you're doing, then you're not really going to be able to succeed as a leader. You also need to empower those people around you. So in the political context, you need to be able to empower the other ministers who are involved, say, in the budget and finance portfolios, to be able to do everything they need to do to support those policies. Look, I haven't really followed Liz Truss's career or anything like that, but I think one of the dangers for leaders, say in a political context, is to lead like an army general fighting a war. It's not the same environment. So you're not like, say an old time general on your horse, in front of the troops saying, "Come, follow me, we're going to win this battle." That might be something you would do in the party room, but I think leadership in a political context where you're really trying to bring into reality a vision that you've already presented to everybody, right? Nothing she did was a surprise. You've got to be very, very good at the art of persuasion. So you've got to be convinced that what you're doing is the right thing to do. That's where you get your grit from. You've got to have that conviction.
That's good.
But you've got to work very, very hard at building a coalition around you. In other words, this is where influence matters a lot.
Yeah, actually, I think that that makes me think about, look, the easiest example of this is church planting, right? But like as leaders, let's not think that church planting is the highest achievement. It's whatever you're called to start when you're starting a new thing. The most important thing is your core group of leaders that you're attracting around you first. It's not about going and doing a big service and try to attract 100 people to a service. It's about who are the people that, like we spoke about a few weeks ago, the early adopters, right? We need to find the people that are sold out for our vision, the people that are on board with us, and they're like, "Yep, we're with you. We're going to support you financially or emotionally," or like you guys on my board, Dr. Rod and the rest of my board. I shared the vision of this and all of you are like, "Yep, we're on board. We're to support you however you need." And I think we need that to be able to go into battle, to know that I've at least got my team. And number one, that team can't just be followers, and that might be a little bit controversial, but I feel like that first core group of team needs to actually be people that will hold us accountable. People that, because this was a grand plan, but maybe if someone had have maybe kept her in check and gone, maybe it's a little bit too big of a plan, and maybe we need to, instead of them being yes men and naysayers, maybe there should have been some trusted, confidants in there that will be able to turn around and go, "I'm with you, but what if we shift this a little bit, or I support you, but I don't agree with that thought." And so, yeah, as leaders, well, what do you expect when you're going into a system that is already rigged against you? Well, you expect some opposition, and so you need some grit. You need to know what you're actually chasing, and you need to build that team around you, and you need to invest in them. You need to invest in them and make sure that they're being discipled and making sure that they're growing as well, so that they have the grit to stand through. You know, the disciples falling asleep when Jesus was praying to, you know, at his greatest point of challenge. We need to make sure that our team can stay with us as well. Let's transition into talking about business leaders. And on our theme of like, well, what do you expect? What do you expect when a conspiracy theorist gets a microphone? What do you expect? So I don't know whether you know much about the story, but there's a gentleman called Alex Jones who is the host of a let's call it a radio show. Some would say it's a conservative radio show. Some would actually say it's more of a conspiracy radio show that he has. But he's a media personality that likes to. He's very vocal. Let's call him. He's a modern day shock jock. Right, he's kind of like the Kyle Sanderlands, I suppose you could say would be a good reference for him. But if you listen to his stuff, he's very, very strongly opinionated one way or other about something, and he does like to focus on the conspiracy behind things, whether they be true or not. He's very vocal around that. And when there was the Sandy Hook school mass shooting, unfortunately, he viewed his opinions quite strongly, almost rallied his army around, because obviously his followers are very strong followers. He's got a very strong fan base, and he started out by claiming that was a hoax. He said that, no, it didn't happen, it's a hoax. And unfortunately, there was a lot of public attack on social media and in person as well against the families of the victims of the children that have been, that were unfortunately killed in that mass shooting. And there was this big court case around it, and there's a lot of controversy around that alone. But the court verdict was $965 million that he needs to pay out. That's his court payout that he needs to pay out, $965 million. And then now they're going to trying to persuade the defendants, not the defendants, sorry, what's the word for the other side? Sorry, I've gone blank on that.
We have the prosecute. You mean the prosecution?
That's it, the prosecution.
Yeah, prosecution and defense, yeah.
That's it. So we don't get everything right. We're not lawyers, obviously. But the prosecution are now trying to claim for, get this, $2.75 trillion in damages. That's it. $2.75 trillion in damages. Now, obviously, he's done the typical business response. I'm going to go to Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and you don't get anything. Because, look, from an organization that makes that, there's discussions around, let's say, roughly around $10 million a year. Obviously, it's not all profit. Maybe there's a couple of $1 million in profit, but it costs a lot of money to run a media station, as you know, Dr. Rod, as you've done in the past. And so two things. What do you expect? What do you expect when a conspiracy theorist says something that his stuff is all just way out there? What do you expect when he rants about something like this? And then what do you expect when you try to sue someone for almost $1 billion, and then what no, we're going to go for 2.75 trillion. Well, it's just going to go into bankruptcy and you're not going to get a cent. What do you expect, Dr. Rod?
Well, I would expect a bit of sanity to prevail.
Exactly.
But I think for those of us who live in places like Australia, we just can't follow the American legal system because damages both claimed and actually awarded just seem to be so mind-bogglingly out of line with anything that anybody could ever pay. But one of the things that struck me, reading about him, I'm actually wondering whether his business model doesn't include being sued every now and then, and that some of this is a deliberate ploy to generate publicity.
Yeah, well, on that note, there was I forget what, there was someone being interviewed about this, and they were saying that, well, the media actually made a mistake by making this case so big, because before, Alex Jones was just this random guy on social media and had a show and that was it, and had a bit of a cult following, and he was kind of known for what he does. But now they're kind of making a martyr out of him, and now everyone knows who Alex Jones is. Everyone's talking about. Now he's this massive celebrity. He's gone into Chapter 11, which in America is pretty much means he can run as he wants. He just can't make a profit, and any profit that he makes, he has to pay to the ruling or to the verdict. But as we all know, you can run a business at a loss and make lots of money. You just happen to have different expenses, right? And this is just making him more famous. So what do you expect when you're suing someone so greatly for this? Yeah, you're just going to you're adding fuel to the fire almost.
Yes, look, I think it's very regrettable, of course, that families have suffered.
Yes.
And let me say at the outset, I don't share his particular theory on what happened there. I think the evidence is quite strongly to the contrary, that yes, it actually did happen and that real people lost their lives, and it's caused great trauma for many families. So I don't agree with the notion that a business model should include making outrageous, unfounded, badly researched statements in the knowledge that you are likely at some point or other to be sued, and then you'll get lots and lots of free publicity. So look, I don't agree if that's his business model. I don't agree with it. I think we should take great care with any news or current affairs that affects the lives of individuals. But the way in which these things are hyped up, and the legal system with these massive claims and often actual awards of damages that really don't bear any economic relationship with the harm done, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I think it's just leading us down the wrong path altogether. The best thing to do would be to simply ignore him. Yes. Really. If we could somehow, as a side, look, just go into your corner, do your little thing. We don't agree with that. I mean, I don't think, as a Christian, I don't think that we should knowingly impose any kind of hardship or cost on others for our own direct benefit.
Yeah, that's good.
I just don't think that's how the kingdom of God.
I want you to repeat that, Dr. Rob, because that's actually a really powerful statement.
I don't think we should impose any cost on others knowingly in order to generate revenue or income or profit for ourselves. So I just don't think we should be playing around with a story like this, if indeed that is his business model.
Yeah.
I don't think it sits well at all with our Christian culture. So
we as leaders, a lesson we can take from this is be careful who we're getting our information from. Be very careful, because what do you expect when you listen to a conspiracy theorist? He's going to share conspiracies. And it almost, for me, it kind of, I suppose it almost is in line with gossip, and the Bible speaks very strongly about that.
But I tell you what, I think some of what we called conspiracy theory during COVID is turning out to be true. And look, I think this is symptomatic of the fact that we have or are losing our confidence in public institutions like government, like academic experts, our universities, our hospitals, and so on. So I think one reason for the proliferation of what we might loosely call conspiracy theories is we're losing trust in the people in whom we should have trust. And look, I feel this myself. I think I feel far less secure in trusting government and the so-called experts now than I did even 3 years ago because of the experiences we've had. So there's something dreadfully wrong with many of our institutions. The Bible calls it sin.
Yeah.
And when our institutions are run for the benefit of individuals, not for the benefit of others, then this is bound to happen. And I think what we're seeing really is an outworking of true selfishness in all of our institutions, a grab for power, a grab for self-aggrandizement, and so on and so forth. And one of the costs we're paying as a society is we either have or we are losing confidence in public institutions.
Yeah, that it's interesting because, I mean, think back a number of years ago. Let's say 5 years ago, conspiracy theories were UFOs, Beyonce's in the Illuminati, and aliens.
And we didn't land on the moon.
And we didn't land on the moon, right? But now it's really interesting that now the conspiracy theories seem to be coming so much closer to home. That there's so much more validity to a lot of them, and they actually affect, like, who cares if Beyonce's in the Illuminati, or who cares if we actually landed on the moon or not, like, or the Earth is flat, whatever. But there's certain things now, like, especially from the pandemic, all these things and things you're seeing in politics and January 6th and all that happened in the States, all these conspiracies are now kind of, it's this whole misinformation. I suppose the question that I've got for you, Dr. Rod, is how do we as leaders know that some information that we're receiving is misinformation, conspiracy theory, or just fact?
Oh, look, that's very hard to do, especially when a lot of people get their information from the internet. So you've got to be very careful about how you source information. You do need, I think, to refer to quite a lot of different sources. You do need to ask yourself, has this person got the kind of track record that would lead me to trust them, or this source, be it a government source or an expert or whatever? I have to say, I'm an academic, but I find it harder and harder to take even academics or experts at their word, because I'm never sure what kind of political position might be lurking, underneath what they're saying. I feel the overreach of governments during COVID was massive. I know here in Australia we had a pandemic response policy at the national level that had only been revised, I think, in 2019. That just went out the window. Look, we've been through, I think, a period of time which has created a lot of negative impacts, but I think it has woken us up to the fact that we're living in the West, in particular, we're living in a world which has become increasingly godless. Where many individuals are they're centered on themselves, in a sense they are self-centered, as it were. My plea to leaders, if you want to be a decent, godly leader, you need to place a very, very high priority on your personal integrity. You really do. And I think that, we're lacking integrity in a lot of leaders today. And I think it's primarily because they are leading for themselves. They're not leading for others. And Jesus led for others. This is where the whole idea of servant or shepherd leadership comes from. Jesus led for others. And as leaders, I think we need to do the same. So integrity is vitally important, even if it costs us. I'd rather lose a leadership position than compromise on integrity.
That's really good. So let's not be that person that is looked at as a conspiracy theorist. Let's be looked at someone that has integrity. Let's be that person, that a type of leader that people can look to and trust that what they say is true. You know, when you don't know, admit you don't know. You know, talk about what you know and the facts, but you know, be of integrity. And then we can have people look to us and follow us properly. Another thought with that, Dr. Rod, is obviously the victims are going against Alex Jones and all this drama that's happening. Sometimes we go against. I mean, it kind of like never fight a crazy person. Right? I kind of like, I remember like back, you know, I used to always, my father actually taught me how to defend myself and how to look after myself physically if I got into any drama. And my dad always taught me, don't necessarily worry about the big scary guy. Watch out for the little crazy guy, because the little crazy guy in the corner, like, he's the one that's going to actually cause problems and not care, or what, like, you know. And so it kind of feels like these people, there's kind of two lessons from two different sides. Is let's not be a conspiracy theorist and let's have some integrity. But the other side of it is like, be careful who we're fighting against. You know, like, it just seems like this fight, they're fighting against a crazy person, so they've become crazy in fighting him, you know, asking for 2.75 trillion, you know, and all this sort of stuff. Like, they've kind of, you know, like the old saying is like, if you argue with a stupid person, it makes two, right? So yes, I can't tell you where all these quotes came from. They're just random things that I've picked up over time. They're not official quotes of anyone, but they just make sense, right? So how do we pick our battles, Dr. Rod?
With great wisdom, and you need to pray a lot about it. Look, as Christians, you know, we've usually clearly made up our mind we're not going to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, we usually have a menu of, you know, good things to choose from. We've got to choose the best. And I think it is important for us to know what is God's assignment for us. And then we need to be quite careful to stick within the boundaries of that assignment. So what you and I are doing now, that is perfectly consistent with what I believe to be God's assignment to me at this point. Now, it's always going to be consistent with my overarching call in life. It's all about communication.
Yeah.
And it's primarily focused on the business world.
Yeah.
My assignment, so yes, I'm a pastor. I'm known as the business pastor. I pastor people in business. I do have a church, but that fits within the assignment. And so I think it's important that we understand, what has God assigned us to?
Yeah.
And for you and me, there's an overlap of assignment. Your assignment and mine are not the same, but right now, as we're sharing together, we're operating within that overlap.
Yeah.
And so we need, I think, prayerfully to consider what is it that God has actually assigned us to, and our choices should be made within that context. I don't know whether that helps, Craig. But,
no, it does.
It's a complex area. It's a very, very complex area. But we should be very careful to avoid operating in such a way as to knowingly hurt or undermine others, or do damage to their, you know, flourishing as a human being.
Yeah.
And everything we should do, we're meant, God intended that every human being should flourish, everything we do, I believe, should contribute positively to the flourishing of others. And like as a general guideline for anyone who's a Christian, there are three things, and I think we shared these last week. We give God glory. We're here to give God glory. We're here to encourage one another. That is to encourage the saints. And we're here to bring the good news of the gospel to those who don't know it. And I think that provides a pretty good framework for the way in which we should operate as leaders. And look, if I could just add one other thing. Look, I think we need to be quite careful about just saying, this is how someone's doing it. All right. So we look at someone like Alex Jones and say, this is how Alex is doing it. Why don't I do the same thing to achieve my objective?
Yeah.
But you've got to filter that through.
Yeah.
Does it give God glory? Does it encourage the saints? And does it contribute something to the spread of the gospel and salvation of the lost?
Yeah.
And then, of course, what is the overarching heart of God is that all on this planet should flourish.
Yes.
I think they're fairly good filters. But it's not easy. It's not easy, Craig. You know, the easiest thing in the world for me to do is to sit in my office here in Australia and do what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
But when someone is in an environment where they have to actually make the choices, it's not all that easy.
Yeah. Yeah, and back to what you were saying before, we need to know what our assignment is. We need to know what our purpose is. And that it makes it easier. It doesn't make it easy. It just makes it easier. And
that's correct.
And
that's right.
It's easier for us to make decisions. It's easier for us to know what to do. It's easier for us to be able to spend the time to hear from God, to get the guidance from Him. And shameless plug, I gotta put this. If you're struggling to know what your assignment is or your purpose is, well, our leadership program starts off with guiding you through discovering what your purpose is, and we use a number of different really cool mechanisms to be able to do that in line with the Holy Spirit, being connected with God and hearing from Him what His assignment is for us, as well as a lot of really practical tools.
And I can say do that, because I've seen most of these materials. I love them, and one of the reasons why I'm working with Craig like this for nothing is because I really believe in what it is he's doing. And so, hook into it, because I guarantee it's going to change your life.
Thank you. So transition into, let's talk about ministry leaders. And, well, what do you expect? What do you expect when organizations bend values, right? What happens when they kind of twist their views a little bit? Obviously going on with this theme of knowing what your purpose is and knowing what your call and your assignment is, knowing what your values are. We need to know these things to be effective leaders and to make the right decisions as leaders. And there was this story of a Methodist church in Texas, quite a large Methodist church in Texas, that recently was one of many that seemed to be leaving the United Methodist Church and going off and being an independent Methodist church. And the controversy around them leaving, obviously they're leaving because the United Methodist Church is being, let's say, a little bit questionable with their views with same-sex marriage and all of those, let's call them woke characteristics or things that are happening in culture right now. But what was actually really controversial around them leaving is they're a church that has members, and technically with a big, move like this, there's meant to be a member vote. But they didn't take a member vote. The controversy is they just decided to leave. Now, obviously it wasn't an overnight decision. Obviously the board sat and spoke about it. The leadership obviously spent a lot of prayerful time considering it, and decided it was best for them to stick to their values and separate from the greater organization that they were part of that didn't really share their values anymore. And Dr. Rod, we as leaders sometimes do have to make hard decisions. sometimes we can't get consensus. How do we know the difference? Because I kind of feel like, yeah, they didn't need to get the vote because everyone was a member of certain values and the greater organization is no longer part of the values. So technically everyone's already voted on it because they voted for the values, right? So kind of like go, well, yeah, no need to put it to a vote. Like, it's blatantly against our values. We're making a change. Don't go through bureaucracy. Let's just stand up for what we've got to do. But there's sometimes that we shouldn't do things by ourselves as leaders. How do we know the right time to make a decision by ourselves, or when I say by ourselves, with our small group rather than taking a larger vote, versus this is something that we should get general consensus on?
As a general rule,
yep,
the leader takes decisions without reference to many other people in a crisis or when there's a catastrophe. Now, that could be a natural disaster like a flood, a fire, or earthquake, or something like that. But it could also be a sudden crisis brought on by, let's say, a decision which is made by the peak body that may relate to an important doctrinal position which is held generally by the people who make up the congregations and so on. Generally speaking, no, a leader would make decisions that are not critically urgent because of the circumstances by harvesting the input of as many people as possible.
Yeah,
I think those are the general principles. Now, the UMC, the United Methodist Church in the United States, and look, one of the people need to know this. You and I do a bit of research, of course, before we record these. Quite a bit of research, I might add.
Yep. Before
we record these sessions. And I did some research on UMC. I'm not an expert on it, but my understanding is that as a grouping, as a denomination, they are related what they call connectionally. Now, what that means is that there's no sophisticated, detailed body of policy to which every church congregation signs up to. So it's as it were a voluntary group. People belong to it. Churches belong to it because they decide that they want to belong to it. That's the difference between a connectional system and a more formal congregational system where there's a much higher degree of centralization of power, decision-making authority, particularly authority to make statements about doctrine and theology, and so on. But on the other hand, and look, I have to say, I haven't been able to follow this up in as much detail as I would like to. My understanding of their doctrine of the people within the church, it's based on 1 Peter 2:9, in which we're declared, us believers in Jesus, we're declared to be a royal priesthood.
Yeah.
And this leads to what's called congregational governance. And here in Australia, for example, it's practiced by the Baptist, what we call the Baptist Union, right? And so there's a lot of voting of congregations. It's practiced as well in Presbyterian churches, I know, and probably some others that I'm not aware of at this point. The idea is that as Christians, as priests, we all hear from God.
Yeah.
And therefore, particularly when a major decision like this is being made, our theology tells us that we should take a vote because the Holy Spirit is going to move individuals such that the outcome of that process is the right decision in the Lord and is the right decision for that congregation. So on the one hand, I understand why the leadership of this particular church would want to leave the UMC, because what they are seeing is that there is a general agreement doctrinally that goes counter to the classical or historical understanding of the biblical teaching on human sexuality and other things.
Yeah.
So I certainly understand. Now, in my own denominational framework, yes, there'd be no issue because we don't understand the doctrine of the royal priesthood in the same way. And as say as a senior pastor, I could make the decision to withdraw from my particular denominational framework, and I could go independent if I wanted to, because my church owns all the property, not the denomination, and so on and so forth. So different denominations have different ways. My reading of it actually is that in terms of the theology which tends to be adopted by the Methodist churches, is that they actually should have taken a vote within the congregation. But it may be that the leadership saw this as something which was so urgent that they needed to take the action that they did. So, yeah, it's a bit mixed up. My own view, I don't hold to that doctrine of congregational governance.
Yep.
Because frankly, I just don't think everybody does hear from God. Yes, we're declared to be a royal priesthood. That doesn't mean we act as priests.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons why we have leadership in churches, they're the ones we do have confidence in as a congregation, that they do hear from the Lord, and they do, as it were, carry out their priestly obligations in an honourable, ethical, in a manner with integrity, and that we can trust them to do that. But I think one of the things that's happening here is that a decision has been made in a way which is not usual for those people who hold to this congregational governance type approach. So yeah, it's a conundrum. It really is a conundrum.
So to put it in, I mean, let's there, obviously a lot of churchgoers, a lot of pastors watching. One, maybe as a bit of an encouragement to pastors, is we hear you. We know that you're constantly under attack from your congregation because the music was too loud, the lights were too flashy, the room was too dark, the skirts were too short, the skirts were too long, whatever. Like, sometimes we as leaders do get bombarded with a lot of, let's say, trivial, still important, but trivial things that seem to be important to those that we're leading. But there's sometimes that, yes, we do need to get some feedback from our people that we're leading, because it's not. I feel like we as leaders sometimes fall into the trap sometimes of, no, this is my vision, this is what God gave me, and so this is what I'm doing, and so you need to follow me. It's like, actually, no, God's called you to serve a particular type of people, and those people are following you, and you're there to serve them. So we do need a little bit of back and forwards, but I also feel like there's lack of progress because of indecision. There's lack of progress because of overanalyzation. Paralysis by analysis kind of thing of like, well, this was, from my understanding of looking at this as a leader, I feel like this was the right decision, didn't need to be discussed, because it's quite clear that these are our values, which we've spoken about previously, that when you have a clear outline of values, which is their doctrine, right? When you have a clear doctrine of this is how we operate, anything that is outside of that, we're not a part of. And if the organization that we are a part of changes their values, well, what do you expect? What do you expect? We're going to leave. And so I suppose that's kind of, we harp on this message a lot, but to leaders, you need to be clear on your values. You need to be clear on your doctrine. You need to be clear on your beliefs and how you are running your organization, your ministry, so that when those decisions can be made, they can be made easily, and your people know why they're following you. They're following you because they believe those same things. They're following you because they are aligned with your vision and your values. Because if they're just following you because they like your sermons, They like the way you sing. They like the way you dress. If they're just following you for that, when you make a decision that's in line with your values that may not be in line with their values, well, they're going to leave. But when you're so clear on your values and they know it, you will attract the people with the same values. And so, well, what do you expect when you change your values? People are going to leave. And sometimes we as leaders do just need to make a hard decision and not have wisdom around it and get wise counsel. But we don't. There's some things that are just obvious. And just actually, I kind of feel this calling right now. There's leaders watching this right now. And you right now are struggling to make a decision. Your ministry or your organization, your business, your team, whatever, your project, whatever it is right now being held back. You're missing out. God has a blessing just around the corner for you. But you're in analysis paralysis. You are not being bold enough and brave enough to step into that thing that God has called you to. You're not so aligned with your values and knowing that there's something that you're doing or something that you're aligned with that are outside of your values that you need to make a decision that go, I'm not doing that anymore and I'm going this way. And I guarantee you, when you stand up for your values, God will be with you. When you step out into what God's called you to, God will be with you. When you make those hard decisions, God will be with you. He promised His Holy Spirit to be with you. He promised you His Holy Spirit to comfort you, to counsel you, to guide you. He's calling you to something. And I know there's some of you watching right now that are challenged by something, aligned with something that aren't quite aligned with your values. Know your values, make a decision, and make a move. Talking about making a move, kind of a nice transition, because just before you roll off the video and go and make that move, listen to this last point. Our leadership lessons from Luke. Let's look at the Bible. Let's look to the Bible and what God has to say for leaders that are about to make a decision to make a move. Maybe you're about to leave. Maybe you're about to change organizations, quit your job, start a new church plant, do something new, go out and start. Let me talk about the parable of the lost boy. Now, you know it. It's in Luke 15:11, and Jesus shares his parable about the lost boy. Now, obviously, you've heard it preached a million times, and all from the guise of, well, God will always be there. You may leave, but when you come back, God's grace will cover you, and He'll be there. So many metaphors in there. There's so many messages in there. But we as leaders, I want to look at the start of the story, where the son comes to his dad and says, "Dad, give me my inheritance. I want to leave." And he had every right to that inheritance, and it was rightfully his. But as we know the story goes, it wasn't the right time for him to take his inheritance and step out and go on his own. I know some of you are thinking right now, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to start a new ministry. I'm going to leave whatever I'm in right now because I know there's something that God's called me to. This is a bit of a warning. Sometimes we can act too soon. Sometimes we can act too soon and run ahead of God and run out of our resources and maybe not do things the right way. Dr. Rod, how do we make sure that we don't run ahead of God?
I hate to say this, but you've got to listen to God. And I've had this experience 3 or 4 times. I've sort of been in employment or ministry or whatever, for over 40 years now, and I've had this experience on numerous occasions when I was fairly certain it was time to make a move, but I pray, and the word I get is stay. Sometimes it's inconvenient to stay. Sometimes when you're in a fairly difficult kind of position, it's uncomfortable to stay. But I have, and it's quite interesting because after I've stayed for a while, then you get this unmistakable nudge that I believe comes from the Holy Spirit that says, now the time is right. And look, that's happened for me 3 times in my career. Once after being in a particular role for some 16 years. Once after about a decade, and the other one was only for about 2.5 years. But in each of those cases, I was certain it was, time to move on. In every case, when I took it to the Lord, He said, stay. And a couple of times staying was actually quite tough because it wasn't fun to stay. But then God released me, and every time that I took that release in God's timing, blessing did flow. Absolutely no doubt about it. And I think what it boils down to is you've got to have a really close personal relationship with God, so you can go to God and say, look, I need you to show me what, how, and when.
Yes.
And I do believe that you'll get the answers. And often it'll come in different ways. It can come through others speaking with you. It can come simply through that unction, that Holy Spirit unction, the peace that you have, that yes, now is the right time to move. You may receive, a vision. Somebody might speak a word of prophecy over you, and that has been my experience too. That was part of the mix. Your circumstances might dictate that right now is the time to go, and often there'll be some combination. So be sensitive to all those things. And if I can say too, and you're probably going to say something about this, I might be jumping the gun, so to speak, but it's also instructive to read to the end of that parable, isn't it? Because guess what happened? The son was actually redeemed.
Yes.
And even if we do make a mistake, God's in the full-time business of redemption. Don't forget that. I remember my wife, she taught me this lesson years and years ago. She said, look, God will redeem you from your mistakes. So look, even if you're listening now, you're watching this right now, and you've made a mistake, read the rest of the parable. Because God's in the full-time business of redemption, and He will even redeem us from our mistakes.
That's really good. I often use this metaphor that our purpose is a highway, and we may choose to take an exit too soon. And you know what's great about highways? There's always another on-ramp further up. We may have to take some back streets.
Rerouting or recalculating.
Yep.
You do get back on track, don't you?
Yeah, we may have to take some back streets. We may have to go through some dodgy neighborhoods. But in the end, like there's always an on-ramp. There's always an on-ramp, and God is always there, like in that story, welcoming us with open arms, with love. It's yes, like you share that you've been through that scenario a couple of times where you've had to wait for the right time to leave. And you've mentored me through that a number of times as well, myself, when I knew that I felt like God was calling me to leave, and it was always just waiting on the right time. And there's a couple of things that I kind of want to share with that. Is number one is make sure you've got some mentors. Because whenever I had those situations, I had my intercessors praying into it, I had Dr. Rod as my pastor, sharing wisdom, my psychologist helping me through the mental challenges of whatever I'm facing or whatever I'm dealing with, right, to make sure it's a smart decision, not just an emotional decision. And it's it's amazing to be able to have that support. And I truly believe that I made the right decision each time because I had the right support. So first thing is, how do we know when is the right time to leave? Well, get you some wise counsel. Get some advisors. Get some mentors. The second is kind of, what do you do while you're waiting? Because you mentioned, Dr. Rod, quite often we want to leave because it's an uncomfortable situation. Quite often, and I'm sure there's lots of you, and I know there's lots of you because I speak to so many people and they have this exact same story, that they're sitting under poor leadership. That, remember, it's not the person, it's the behavior.
That's right.
But they're sitting under poor leadership, that they feel oppressed, that they don't feel like they're fulfilling their purpose, they feel used and abused, they are just dreading going to work, and sometimes there is literal abuse, emotional or mental abuse going on, sometimes physical, and it's not the best situation. But sometimes we do need to wait it out. I've been in those situations. I've been in situations where I knew I had to leave, but I knew it wasn't the right time. And so I sat under for months, sat under some really bad behavior and suffered from it. But I think that what I want to encourage people with is, like the lyrics to the Elevation song, it's about what you do while you're waiting, right? You got to wait on God, but we can't wait on God and go, well, I know God's called me to leave, but he hasn't told me to leave yet, so I'm just going to sit here. And you don't go and complain and whinge and go moping into work and create a negative environment in work because, the boss treats me badly, so I'm just going to treat everyone badly. No. We need to have integrity ourselves. We need to make sure, and actually I was speaking to a client the other day, and they were sitting under some poor leadership, and I said to them, remember, you're not working for that leader. You're not working for that boss. You're not working for that company. You're working for God. We are there. Our work is worship to God. Do everything to the glory of God. And even in a bad situation, we need to glorify God. Even in the midst of trials, we need to praise him. If Paul writes through all of his trials and challenges and everything like that, he always spoke positively about his mission, always spoke positively about, I'm in chains, but it's okay. It's my opportunity to be able to witness. There's endless stories of that. So if you're in that situation, if you're feeling like God is calling you to leave a place, but not yet, because remember, well, what do you expect if you leave too early? Well, sometimes we may not be prepared financially. Maybe we may not be prepared emotionally. I know that there's a number of times that I waited until the right time, and when I did step out, I literally stepped straight into something else. Or there was some circumstances that changed, or I learned something along the way that I'm like, now I get it. Now it's time for me to leave, right? And so what do you expect if you leave too early? Well, you won't be ready. You won't have the resources. You won't have the knowledge. You won't have the experience. And so, and you'll be running ahead of God. Doesn't mean that God won't be with you. God's always with you. But sometimes we will run ahead of him and his blessings need to catch up to us, so to speak. So, but make sure while you're waiting for God to move, make sure you're working to the glory of God. Make sure you're still the witness that even under poor leadership, and I've got so many testimonies, people coming back to me saying, I know what you were sitting under, and I can't believe your attitude. I can't believe you still served with all of your heart. You still gave your all. You're still positive. And that has now put me in a more positive light because of that. Dr. Rod, I kind of want to give you closing thoughts on on this topic, because it's I know it's actually something you've mentored me through a lot, and it's something that I believe that you have a lot of wisdom around, and you're the business pastor.
Yeah.
Pastor some of these people in this challenging situation for a moment.
Well, you've said God is with you in all of this, and all I can say is a hearty hear, because it is quite true. The longest period during which I was waiting was 6 years, almost 6 years.
Wow.
But see, I just knew that I was hearing from God, and I was staying because He said stay. And you made the comment too about, don't stay, and make sure everybody around knows that that's the case. If you know what I mean. My 4-year-old granddaughter is learning a memory verse. This month's memory verse is from Philippians 2 verse 14, which starts out, do all things without grumbling or disputing. And then it goes on in verse 15, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation. So, good. While things are not working properly around you, because let's face it, sin undermines leaders, it undermines leadership, it undermines business, undermines everything. Sin wrecks just about everything. But, take a leaf out of my little she's struggling with this memory verse, by the way, not because she can't remember it. The hassle is, of course, putting it into practice. And it's hard for a 4-year-old. It's hard for a 40-year-old. It's hard for a 66-year-old like me as well. But it does us good to read and heed the word of God. But always know, see, God is in the business, as it were, of redeeming. And I wouldn't expect that He's going to keep you waiting for 6 years or anything like that. That was just my experience, and that was a once in my lifetime experience as well. My waiting times have never been. That was the longest by far. And when I look, I can see there are lots and lots of reasons for that, and God worked on me during that period as well. So it wasn't just waiting. Isn't just sitting. Waiting is actually an active thing where you're allowing God to work on you. You're gaining more experience, which of course you'll be able to use later on. So look, be encouraged. If you are in a waiting period, God is still with you. If you're in a situation which on reflection is the result of you making that move too soon, just remember the parable of the lost son, or the prodigal son. He got his redemption because his dad welcomed him back. And so take encouragement from that as well. But as always, as Craig so often says, don't do this on your own. Leadership is not something that you should be doing on your own. Have mentors, have intercessors, have people around you who love you.
That's good. That's a beautiful way to end. And so, to wrap up our theme of today, well, what do you expect? What do you expect when you let an artistic person rant? What do you expect when a plan doesn't, or when you're going up against a system that is built against you? What do you expect when you listen to a conspiracy theorist? What do you expect when you change your values and people leave? And what do you expect when you leave too soon? So I hope those have been really valuable, and hope they've sparked some thoughts or revelations for you to help you become a better leader. If you enjoyed this podcast, give it a like. We'd really appreciate that. And hey, we'd love to hear your comments about any of the topics that we've shared today. I would love to be able to read how it's impacted you. And hey, if you appreciate this type of content, we would really appreciate it if you would consider subscribing to the channel, and so that you can watch more of our faith-based leadership content, so that you can become a better leader, so you can learn, live, and lead on purpose. Dr. Rod, as always, thank you, and your loud shirt.